This is my chance to give an introduction to one of the research charters for ILSI U.S. in Canada that leads into the work that you're going to hear about next from Jeremy Hill. And we have been motivating each other in this area for quite a while now. You may remember that the last two ILSI global in-person meetings, we had symposia on harmonized nutrient requirements. So we've been thinking in this space for a long time. And we had Lindsay Allen at both of those sessions who presented a plea for the world to develop harmonized nutrient requirements. So far, different regions have developed their own. I want to make sure I should have figured this out before. That's not what I wanted to do. Well, I don't know if I can use a pointer or not. Anyway, different regions come up with different average nutrient requirements. The EAR or the AR for EFSA, that one, okay. Oh, yeah, there we go. And then with the safety margin, they get to the RDA or the PRI or the RNI. And Lindsay and others have been saying if we could all work together, because biologically we're all the same, we could have unified, harmonized requirements. And that would be very useful for food labeling, for formulating and labeling nutrient content per serving, for assessing diets and formulating food products and other dietary products. But there may be a need for regional adaptation, and mostly that would relate to bioavailability. So ILSI wouldn't be the one that would create these harmonized nutrients, but we could help make them regionally relevant and adapt them. So in her paper, Lindsay Allen put a proposal for a number of nutrients to be harmonized based on the IOM and EFSA recommendations, whichever one was the more recent. And she gives us the insight of how you might adapt nutrients for bioavailability. But we really can only do this pretty much for iron and zinc of the minerals. So here you have high, moderate, or low absorption, depending on the food or the staples in the diet, and similarly with zinc. And that's because there have been algorithms that have been developed based on accumulated data in the literature that would predict bioavailability. So if you can take the general food or the food profile of a region, you could predict iron or zinc bioavailability. What we're proposing to do in this charter is to do other nutrients of concern. And we're going to start with calcium. And one of the reasons we're going to start with calcium is because it's pretty much inadequate in terms of intake relative to requirements around the world. So this is some work that Keith Levidny and I have been working on with Meryl Wasney to take a look at the gaps between calcium intake and production and the recommendations around the world. So this code is, if you're in the green area, you have a lesser gap relative to the requirements than you do for the deep red area. So production on the left, in the top set of the world maps is in 1961 to show how it's changed over time, and the bottom is 2018. So production would suggest that parts of the world are producing adequate supplies of calcium in the green, but not all of the parts of the world. And then if you look on the right to apparent intake, then you see it's even worse off. So you have Africa and large parts of Asia that are very inadequate but compared to requirements. and it got a little better from 1961 to 2018, but not a lot. You still have huge areas of concern. And even in some countries, like parts of Europe and North America, where there's adequate calcium produced, mostly in the form of dairy, distribution or selection isn't adequate. So you still have shortages. So this data from the U.S. using NHANES, the nationally representative population, shows for, oh, I hit the wrong one again, shows for calcium that about 35% of people from food only are inadequate, reaching less than half of the requirement. And supplements in the dark bar help for the people who are selecting calcium supplements. So now you're down to like 20% deficient. And in contrast, calcium with the other micronutrients, there's a large gap. The only ones that have a larger gap are vitamin D and vitamin E. So does the source of calcium matter and therefore bioavailability? I spent my career estimating calcium bioavailability from a lot of foods, and this shows you a contrast of two foods where we intrinsically labeled milk by giving isotopic tracers to a cow, lactating cow, and growing plants hydroponically and putting tracers in the nutrient solution. And so when we fed to humans equal loads of calcium as milk or spinach, the spinach calcium was only 1/10 as well absorbed as the calcium from milk because it's very rich in oxalic acid, the main inhibitor of calcium. So if you look at a broader range of foods we studied, and this is only a partial list, if you look at the calcium content per serving times the fractional absorption of calcium or the bioavailability from that food, and you get the estimated absorbable calcium content per serving, then to make it easy to translate, over on the right, how many servings do you need to equal 1 glass of milk or 1 cup of yogurt for absorbable calcium? And you can see all these plant foods, some of them, if they don't have oxalic acid, are highly absorbed, but the content is so low that you have to take so many servings to equal 1 serving of a dairy product, that it's impractical to meet all your needs that way. Only if you have calcium fortified foods, like this example, tofu, can you get a reasonable 1-to-1 serving. So we're taking all of these data and making a bioavailability algorithm through this project in ILSI so that we can predict regional adaptations of calcium requirements around the world. So to summarize, calcium intakes for most of the world are below recommended intakes. Calcium requirements have been developed using a variety of approaches. Can we move to a harmonized average requirement and adjust it for bioavailability? And calcium is only the beginning of what our project is going to be about, but we're starting there. And I want to bring up Jeremy Hill now, who's done a lot of work in this area.